Kensington Strangler. Between November and December of 2010, 3 women were found within a 10-block radius in Philadelphia's Kensington neighborhood. All 3 had been strangled. All 3 had been assaulted. All 3 were posed in identical positions. Someone was hunting along Kensington Avenue's notorious corridor, a stretch known locally as the Stroll, and the city knew it. The neighborhood was already one of the most dangerous in Philadelphia, plagued by the opioid crisis and an open-air market for controlled substances. The women who walked those blocks at night were among the most vulnerable people in the city, and someone was targeting them. The first victim was 21-year-old Elaine Goldberg, a nursing student at Gwynedd Mercy College who was battling an opioid addiction. She was found on November 3rd in a vacant lot on the 2800 block of Ruth Street, partially clothed and posed in a degrading position. 10 days later, on November 13th, 35-year-old Nicole Piacentini, a Port Richmond resident, was discovered in an abandoned building on Cumberland Street near Jasper. Then on December 15th, 27-year-old Casey Mahoney, originally from Asheville, North Carolina, was found near railroad tracks in Kensington. The pattern was unmistakable. Same method, same staging, same neighborhood. At least 3 other women survived encounters with the same man and came forward. One worked with a sketch artist to produce a composite after the second case. But here's the twist that makes this case unlike any other. The person responsible was 22-year-old Antonio Rodriguez, and his DNA was already in police hands before the second and third women were targeted. As a convicted felon, his sample had been collected on October 25, 2010. But Philadelphia's crime lab had a backlog of more than 5,000 cases. The Pennsylvania State Police acknowledged an approximately 80-day delay between receiving the sample and uploading it to the CODIS database. Computer upgrades and insufficient staffing were cited as the reasons. Processing did not begin until December 21st. The match was not confirmed until mid-January of 2011. Had that sample been processed when it was received, Nicole Piacentini and Casey Mahoney might still be alive. How does a city sit on evidence that could have prevented 2 lives from being taken? Rodriguez was arrested on January 17, 2011, in the kitchen of an abandoned house on Motor Street, based on an anonymous tip. He confessed that same day, producing 3 graphic written statements describing each case in detail. For his third case, he had used a condom, aware that police were tracking him through DNA, but he left the condom at the scene. He was evolving, adapting to the investigation, but still making mistakes. He waived his right to a jury trial in exchange for prosecutors dropping the ultimate penalty, citing his mental health history and a documented psychiatric background. The bench trial before Judge Jeffrey P. Meinhardt lasted just 2.5 days. The evidence was overwhelming. On August 16, 2012, Rodriguez was found guilty on all counts and received 3 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus additional consecutive terms. At sentencing, Elaine Goldberg's father stunned the courtroom with words no one expected. "Believe it or not, go in peace, Mr. Rodriguez. May God be with you." But the fallout did not end there. A separate scandal emerged when Noel Quintana, 48, was wrongfully arrested for the cases in December of 2010. Despite Rodriguez's confession, authorities kept Quintana imprisoned for nearly 4 years, pursuing other charges. He was acquitted on September 30th, 2014. The city paid over $1 million in related settlements. Rodriguez remains at Sky Rockview in Center County, Pennsylvania. His appeals have been denied. The DNA backlog that enabled 2 preventable losses has never been the subject of formal accountability. Rodriguez's DNA sat in a queue while women were being targeted. But the next case involves a different kind of failure, one where the wrong man spent 28 years behind bars for something he did not do. The murder of Barbara Jean Horn. On July 12, 1988, A neighbor in the Castor Gardens section of Northeast Philadelphia found the body of a young girl inside a cardboard television box on a sidewalk at 1409 St. Vincent Street. She was unclothed, positioned in a fetal pose with severe head wounds. Her name was Barbara Jean Horn. She was 4 years old. She had vanished from her home at 7245 Rutland Street around 3 in the afternoon, while her stepfather, John Fahey, was watching her. The cause was blunt force trauma, though prosecutors later learned she likely passed from asphyxiation, a fact that was concealed from the defense. Police initially suspected Fahey and 2 neighbors. One neighbor, Ross Felice, was identified by a witness as the man carrying the box. Another, Wesley Ward, owned the television box, and police found disturbing material and a weapon in his home. A 1989 grand jury investigation concluded without any arrests. The case went cold. In 1992, cold case detectives Martin Devlin and Paul Worrell, later implicated in multiple wrongful conviction cases, focused on a man named Walter Ogrod who had lived across the street. Ogrod was a man with intellectual disabilities and what was described as a mixed personality disorder characterized by extreme dependency. He was interrogated for between 6 and 14 hours after being awake for approximately 30 hours. The interrogation was not recorded. He signed a 16-page confession handwritten entirely by Detective Devlin, then immediately recanted upon reaching his holding cell. Ogrod was 6 feet tall and 220 pounds, a glaring mismatch with eyewitness descriptions of a man between 5'6" and 5'8", weighing 160 to 180 pounds. At his first trial in 1993, the jury deadlocked 11-1. The foreman was about to read a not guilty verdict when one juror stood up and announced his disagreement, an extraordinary moment that resulted in a mistrial. At the 1996 retrial, prosecutors introduced 2 jailhouse informants. John Hall, known as the Monsignor, a serial informant used in over a dozen cases whose widow later admitted he lied in 20 or 30 cases, and Jay Walchansky, who heard the story from Hall, not from Ogrod. Ogrod was convicted of first-degree charges and sentenced to the ultimate penalty. He spent 28 years imprisoned. 25 of those years were in solitary confinement on Pennsylvania's death row, locked in a cell for 22 to 23 hours a day. He maintained his innocence the entire time. After Larry Krasner became DA in 2018, the Conviction Integrity Unit under Patricia Cummings reviewed the case from scratch. DNA testing definitively excluded Ogrod as the source of male DNA found on Barbara Jean's body. On June 5, 2020, Judge Shelley Robbins vacated his conviction. ADA. Carrie Wood publicly apologized in court. "I am sorry it took 28 years for us to listen to what Barbara Jean was trying to tell us, that you are innocent." Barbara Jean's mother, Sharon Fahey, stood beside Ogrod's legal team, actively supporting the exoneration of the man who had been convicted of her own daughter's case. In November of 2023, the city paid Ogrod $9.1 million in a wrongful conviction settlement. The Philadelphia Police Department reopened the investigation in September of 2021 after Captain Jason Smith watched a true crime docu-series about the case and decided the original evidence deserved another look. The Conviction Integrity Unit identified 2 potential suspects, one now deceased and one serving life in another state for similar offenses, but no new arrests have been made. Detective Devlin was charged with perjury in a separate wrongful conviction case. A jury acquitted him in March of 2025. Barbara Jean Horn was 4 years old. The man convicted of her case lost 28 years of his life, and the person who actually took hers has never been held accountable. Ogrod lost 28 years for something he did not do. But the next case involves a father who turned his own child into an accomplice across a multi-state trail of horror. Joseph and Michael Callinier. In January of 1975, a father and his son invaded a home in Leonia, New Jersey, and took 8 people hostage. The father demanded that a 21-year-old nurse named Maria Fashing perform an act on a bound hostage that she refused to carry out. When she refused, he slashed her throat with a hunting knife. One of the other hostages, Edwina Wiseman, managed to escape her restraints and ran screaming into the street. The father and son fled out the back door, discarding a bloody shirt, a revolver, and the knife. The father was Joseph Callinger, a Philadelphia cobbler known as the Shoemaker. The son was just 12 years old. Born December 11, 1935, Joseph was abandoned at birth and adopted by Austrian immigrants who ran a shoe repair shop in Kensington. His childhood was defined by extreme mistreatment, forced to kneel on jagged rocks, confined in closets, burned and beaten. By adulthood, he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and claimed to converse with a floating disembodied head he called Charlie. He believed God had commanded him to heal people through their feet. He married, had children, and ran a cobbler shop in Philadelphia. From the outside, he appeared to be an eccentric but functional man. Nobody knew what was happening behind his doors. In July of 1974, Joseph and his son Michael lured a young boy named Jose Colazo to an abandoned factory. The boy did not survive what followed. Later that same month, Joseph targeted his own son, Joseph Jr. He chained the boy to a ladder and lowered him into a flooded sub-basement at 9th and Market Streets. The boy drowned. Joseph had taken out $69,000 in life insurance on him. From November of 1974 through January of 1975, father and son conducted a series of home invasions across Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. The pattern was always the same. They would knock on a door, force their way in once it opened, and hold entire families at knife point for hours, robbing them and terrorizing everyone inside, including the youngest members of the household. The Leonia invasion on January 8th was the final act. A dry cleaner identified the laundry tag KAL on the bloody shirt as belonging to Joseph Callinger. Police arrested both at their Kensington home on January 17, 1975. Joseph received 30 to 80 years for the Pennsylvania home invasions, life for Maria Fashing's case in New Jersey, and 2 additional consecutive life sentences for the other 2 cases, partly based on his own confessions to author Flora Retta Schreiber, who published them in the book The Shoemaker. Michael, as a juvenile, was ruled a delinquent. He was sent to a youth development center, released after approximately 18 months, and placed on probation until age 25. He legally changed his name and has never been heard from publicly again. Nobody knows where he is or what name he goes by. Joseph spent his final years in solitary confinement at Sequoia Crescent in Cambria County, Pennsylvania. He deteriorated completely. He set himself on fire. He threw waste at guards. He attacked another prisoner. He rolled on the floor, howling. He was no longer coherent enough to participate in legal proceedings. He passed away on March 26, 1996, at age 60, after a seizure caused him to choke. The case remains one of the most disturbing father-son criminal partnerships in American history. A man who was tortured as a child grew up to inflict that same horror on others, and he brought his own 12-year-old along to watch and participate. What happened to Michael Callinger? The answer is that nobody knows, and that silence may be the most unsettling detail of all. Callinger's son vanished into a new identity. But the next case involves a death that was right there in plain sight, with 20 stab wounds and a knife still in the chest, and the city called it something nobody could believe. The murder of Ellen Greenberg. On January 26, 2011, 27-year-old first-grade teacher Ellen Greenberg was found in her Philadelphia apartment with 20 stab wounds and a kitchen knife still embedded in her chest. 10 of the wounds were to the back of her neck and head. One wound pierced her aortic arch. Another penetrated her spinal cord. The medical examiner initially ruled it a homicide. Then, after what both the ME and Chief ME later described as an unusual and unprecedented meeting with police and prosecutors, the ruling was changed to self-inflicted. Her parents learned about the reversal from media reports. Ellen was found by her fiancé, Samuel Goldberg, in their 6th-floor apartment at Venice Lofts in Manayunk during a nor'easter. Goldberg told police he had been at the building's gym for about 45 minutes. The apartment door was secured with a swing bar latch from the inside. Dr. Marlon Osborne conducted the autopsy on January 27th and ruled it a homicide. That same day, Goldberg's uncle, James Schwartzman, who served as chairman of the Pennsylvania Judicial Conduct Board, entered the apartment and removed laptops, phones, and credit cards. The chain of custody for electronic evidence was broken. The apartment was then professionally cleaned. Renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht called the case strongly suspicious of homicide. Forensic scientist Dr. Henry Lee, known for his work on the O.J. Simpson trial, concluded the wound patterns and bloodstain evidence were consistent with a homicide scene. Multiple independent experts examined the evidence and reached the same conclusion. The original pathologist, Dr. Osborne, had claimed he consulted a renowned neuropathologist to examine Ellen's spinal cord, but that expert later stated she had no recollection of the case, and no bill, invoice, or report for the consultation existed anywhere. A 2025 review of the case identified 23 stab wounds, not 20, and 31 bruises across her body. None of the wound patterns were consistent with the official finding, and the electronic evidence that might have answered the most important questions had been removed from the apartment by Goldberg's uncle on the very day of the autopsy. Ellen's parents, Joshua and Sandra Greenberg, filed suit in 2019 to reclassify the manner of death. In July of 2024, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed to hear whether estate administrators have standing to challenge an erroneous death certificate. In February of 2025, Dr. Osborne signed a sworn statement reversing his own position, saying the manor should be designated as something other than what it was classified as. A settlement was reached with the city, which agreed to re-examine the case. But in October of 2025, new Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Lindsay Simon issued a 32-page report reaffirming the original revised ruling, categorizing many of the wounds as hesitation wounds, despite multiple independent experts reaching the opposite conclusion. The Greenberg family was devastated. 15 years of fighting, and the city had once again doubled down on a finding that defied the assessment of some of the most respected forensic scientists in the country. Then, in December of 2025, the story took its most dramatic turn yet. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania issued subpoenas to the Philadelphia Police Department, the Medical Examiner's Office, the Law Department, and the Attorney General's Office. The federal investigation is not looking at how Ellen passed. It is looking at whether the officials who handled her case committed crimes. That investigation may encompass scrutiny of then AG Josh Shapiro, now governor of Pennsylvania. Samuel Goldberg has never been named as a suspect. A Hulu documentary, Death in Apartment 603, premiered in September of 2025. How does a woman end up with 23 stab wounds, including to the back of her own head and neck? And the official finding is that she did it to herself? Ellen Greenberg's case is now in federal hands. But the next case unfolded on a 90-acre farm in Bucks County, where 4 young men were lured one by one and never came home. The Bucks County murders. In July of 2017, 4 young men disappeared in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, within a span of 3 days. Their families reported them missing. Search teams fanned out across the county. Investigators traced cell phone pings to a single location, a 90-acre farm in Soulbury Township owned by the DiNardo family. The farm belonged to the parents of 20-year-old Cosmo DiNardo. What police found there would shake the region. The 4 victims were Jimmy Taro Patrick, 19, a rising sophomore at Loyola University, Maryland, on a full scholarship. Dean Finocchiaro, 19, a Neshaminy High School graduate who worked as a cook. Thomas Mio, 21, a type 1 diabetic who worked in construction. And Mark Sturgis, 22, who worked alongside Mayo at his father's construction company. All four had been lured to the farm under the pretext of purchasing marijuana. None of them knew DiNardo was planning something else entirely. On July 5th, DiNardo shot Patrick with a .22 caliber rifle after a deal fell through. He used a backhoe to bury the body. On July 7th, DiNardo and his cousin Sean Kratz picked up Finocchiaro for another buy. Inside the barn, Kratz shot Finocchiaro, wounding him. DiNardo finished it. Hours later that same night, DiNardo shot Mio in the back and then targeted the fleeing Sturgis. Mayo, paralyzed but still conscious and screaming that he could not feel his legs, was run over with a backhoe. The three bodies from July 7th were placed in a metal oil tank that had been converted into a pig roaster, doused with gasoline, burned, and buried in a 12-foot deep grave. The next day, DiNardo and Kratz went out for cheesesteaks. Police tracked a cell phone ping to the DiNardo property. When investigators arrived at the farm, they found Mayo's car parked on the grounds. More importantly, they found his insulin kit still inside the vehicle. For a type 1 diabetic, that was a critical red flag. A person who depends on insulin to survive does not willingly walk away from their medication. Something had happened to Thomas Mayo on this property, and he had not left voluntarily. DiNardo was first arrested on a firearms charge. His father posted $100,000 bail, and Cosmo walked free. He was rearrested just 2 days later for trying to sell Mayo's car for $500. This time, bail was set at $5 million cash. On July 13th, DiNardo confessed to all four cases and identified Kratz's involvement in exchange for prosecutors not seeking the ultimate penalty. Kratz rejected a plea deal of 59 to 118 years on the very day of DiNardo's guilty plea, a shocking last-minute decision that stunned the courtroom. His attorneys had negotiated the deal for months. He turned it down. At his November 2019 trial, he was convicted of first-degree charges for Finocchiaro and voluntary manslaughter for Mayo and Sturgis. The DA dropped pursuit of the harshest sentence, partly because Kratz had boasted on recorded prison phone calls about wanting the notoriety that would come with the ultimate penalty. Prosecutor Weintraub responded with words that cut through the courtroom. He does not get to be notorious. He will forever remain anonymous. DiNardo received 4 consecutive life sentences without parole. He later attempted to sue his own psychiatrist for the emotional distress of being incarcerated, but the Pennsylvania Supreme Court unanimously rejected the claim in November of 2023. Kratz's appeal was denied in October of 2023. The families of the 4 victims settled wrongful death suits in May of 2023 on confidential terms. 4 young men went to a farm in Bucks County for a simple transaction. One by one, they were targeted. One by one, they disappeared. A backhoe, a pig roaster, and a 12-foot grave. How does a 20-year-old with a 90-acre farm and a wealthy family become someone capable of all of that in a span of 72 hours? DiNardo buried 4 young men on his family's property. But the next case involves a man who used a rideshare app to transport a body 140 miles to the mountains. The murder of Jenna Burley. On the night of August 30th, 2017, 22-year-old Jenna Burley walked into Pub Webb, a bar near Temple University's campus in North Philadelphia. She was a junior in her first week of classes, having transferred from Bucks County Community College with plans to study film and media arts. She was excited about the fresh start. She had a close relationship with her parents and had spent the summer preparing for the move. She had never met the man who approached her at the bar at 1:38 in the morning. His name was Joshua Hupperters. He was 29 years old, not a Temple student, just someone who frequented the bars near campus. Surveillance video captured him walking up to her at the bar. They left together at closing time. Jenna never made it back to campus. Inside Hupperter's apartment, the situation turned deadly around 4 in the morning. Prosecutors said Burley was punched 38 times, had a cereal bowl broken over her head, was stabbed, bitten, and strangled so severely her larynx was broken. An upstairs neighbor heard the screaming and called 911. Twice, police responded and knocked on Hupperter's door. They heard nothing inside and left. They did not force entry. They did not investigate further. Had they entered that apartment at 4 in the morning, Jenna Burley might still be alive. Instead, she was already gone, and the man responsible spent the next several hours planning how to dispose of her body. Hupperter's placed Burley's remains in a blue plastic storage bin. His cousin Eric Carlson unknowingly helped load it into a vehicle, commenting, "Dang, this is heavy." Hupperter's then opened the Lyft ride-sharing app and hired a driver named Avery Tucker, paying over $200 cash to drive him and the bin approximately 140 miles to his grandmother's property in Wayne County, deep in the Pocono Mountains. During the ride, he asked Tucker to turn off the GPS. Hupperter's fell asleep in the back seat. A rideshare driver transporting a body 140 miles while the passengers slept behind him. Tucker had no idea what was in the bin. Hupperter's grandfather later discovered the remains in a shed on the property and contacted authorities. Burley's family reported her missing after she failed to show up for class. Investigators traced her movements through surveillance footage at pub, web, and digital records from her phone. The trail led directly to Hupperter's. He was arrested and charged. At trial, he rejected a plea deal of 30 to 60 years, a decision that baffled even his own defense team. The prosecution laid out the full timeline: the bar footage, the 911 calls, the police visit that went nowhere, the cousin who helped carry the bin, the Lyft receipt, the GPS request, the sleeping passenger, and the grandfather who opened a shed door in the Poconos. The jury convicted him of first-degree charges. After less than 90 minutes of deliberation, he was sentenced to life without parole. Jenna's parents later filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Pub Web, arguing the bar bore responsibility for over-serving and failing to protect patrons. The case carried an eerie parallel that no one could ignore. Hupperter's own father, Octavio, had been shot in the head in 1993, his hands bound behind his back, his body placed in a garbage bag and dumped at another location. That case was never solved. Joshua was 4 years old at the time. 2 decades later, his own victim would be found in a plastic bin in a shed in the Poconos. A father taken in one unsolved case, a son who grew up to commit another. Hupperter's conviction was affirmed by the Pennsylvania Superior Court in November of 2020. He remains incarcerated, serving life without any possibility of release. Jenna Burley was 22 years old. She was 1 week into a fresh start at a new school, surrounded by new friends and new possibilities. She met a stranger at a bar at 1:38 in the morning, and that stranger used a rideshare app to carry her body 140 miles to the mountains while he slept in the back seat. Hupperter's used Lyft to move a body 140 miles, but the next case lasted just 72 seconds, and the question of what happened in those seconds divided an entire city. The murder of Sean Schellinger. On the night of July 12, 2018, 37-year-old Sean Schellinger was dining at Rouge, a well-known upscale restaurant overlooking Rittenhouse Square in Center City, Philadelphia. He had been out with friends for the evening and had been drinking for several hours. Around 11 in the evening, Schellinger and friends were driving east on Chancellor Street in a Mercedes, when their vehicle was blocked by another car whose driver was attempting to parallel park. Rather than wait, Schellinger stepped out of the passenger side to confront the situation. A 20-year-old Uber Eats bicycle courier named Michael White happened to be pedaling by on a delivery and stopped when he saw the confrontation escalating. Words were exchanged between the two men. What happened next was captured on surveillance cameras and bystander cell phone video from multiple angles, and the entire encounter lasted approximately 72 seconds. White testified that Schellinger threatened him with a racial remark, a claim Schellinger's side strongly denied. White pulled a hunting knife with a 7-inch blade from his backpack. Multiple camera angles captured what happened next. Video showed Schellinger charging White, wrapping him in a wrestler-style bear hug and lifting him completely off the ground. With his feet in the air and his body pinned, White stabbed downward once into Schellinger's back, a single wound. Schellinger stumbled and collapsed. He was pronounced gone 20 minutes later at the hospital. His blood alcohol was measured at .199, nearly 2.5 times the legal limit, with traces of cocaine also found in his system. The entire encounter from the first word to the final moment lasted approximately 72 seconds. Schellinger was a Philadelphia real estate developer and former Penn State quarterback who came from a well-connected family. He was well known in Center City's business and social circles. White was a 20-year-old college student working as a delivery courier to pay his way through school. He had no criminal record. The case immediately became a lightning rod for racial and class tensions that had been simmering across Philadelphia for years. It also became a defining controversy of District Attorney Larry Krasner's tenure, with critics accusing him of going easy on a case that demanded accountability and supporters arguing he followed the evidence. Krasner first dropped the first-degree charge against White. Then, on the eve of trial, moved to drop the third-degree charge as well, leaving only voluntary manslaughter on the table. The decision enraged Schellinger's family and supporters, who saw it as the DA dismantling the case before the jury even heard it. The jury of 8 women and 4 men, including 5 African-American women, deliberated for 7 hours over 2 days. The verdict: not guilty of manslaughter, not guilty of weapons charges, guilty only of evidence tampering for disposing of the knife and bloody clothes after the incident. White received 2 years of probation and served no prison time whatsoever. The verdict ignited a firestorm that burned through Philadelphia for months. Schellinger's mother, Linda, called for Krasner's arrest for obstruction of justice and was eventually removed from the courtroom after repeated outbursts. Fox News host Tucker Carlson featured the case on his program repeatedly, framing it as an example of progressive prosecution run amok. Both the Schellinger and White families received ongoing threats that continued long after the trial ended. A wrongful death lawsuit against White and Uber Eats was filed in January of 2020 and appears to remain ongoing in the courts. A 3-part Paramount Plus docu-series, 72 Seconds in Rittenhouse Square, premiered in September of 2023, presenting both sides of the story and interviewing witnesses, family members, and legal experts who disagreed sharply about what the evidence showed. White expressed a desire to mentor young people and return to college. No recent criminal activity has been reported. 72 seconds on a Center City street. A real estate developer and a delivery courier. A bear hug and a single stab wound. And a verdict that left half the city outraged and the other half relieved. Was it self-defense or something else entirely? The answer depends entirely on who you ask and which 72 seconds they believe they saw. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The Schellinger case divided Philadelphia along racial and class lines. But the next case united the city in horror because what happened on Lex Street was the deadliest mass shooting in Philadelphia history, and it started over a car with a blown clutch. The Lex Street Massacre. On December 28, 2000, 4 armed men wearing ski masks entered a house at 816 North Lex Street in West Philadelphia. It was a known crack house in the Mill Creek neighborhood, a place where people gathered to buy and use controlled substances. The 4 men forced everyone inside face down on the floor. Then, without warning, They opened fire. 10 people were shot execution style at close range. 7 did not survive. 3 others were left with severe gunshot wounds that would alter the course of their lives forever. It was the deadliest mass shooting in Philadelphia's history, and when investigators finally uncovered the motive behind it, they could barely believe what they were hearing. It started with a used car. A man named Shaheen Black had traded his Chevrolet Corsica plus $300 for George Porter's Dodge Intrepid. After a chain of trades, Porter blew out the Corsica's clutch. He demanded his Intrepid back and used a spare key to take it. Enraged, Black and the Faruqi brothers, Dawood and Khalid, went to the Lex Street house seeking robbery, revenge, and retaliation. The total haul from the robbery was roughly $100 worth of crack, a gold chain, and a jacket. When Dawood Faruqi's ski mask fell off and his face was exposed, the shooting began. They were eliminating witnesses. The 7 who did not survive included Samuel Harris Jr., who was 15 and the youngest victim of the night, George Porter, 18, the very man whose car dispute had started the chain of events, Calvin Helton Jr., 19, Tyrone Long Jr., 18, Ronette Abrams, 33, and the only woman in the house that night, Edward Sudler, 44, and Alfred Goodwin, 54, the oldest. 3 others survived with devastating injuries that would affect them for the rest of their lives. 7 lives taken and 3 more shattered, all because of a car deal that started with a $300 trade and a blown clutch. The total value of what the shooters took from that house was roughly $100 in crack, a gold chain, and a jacket. Police initially arrested the wrong men. 4 innocent individuals, Jermel Lewis, Hezekiah Thomas, Sekon Yuk, and Quiyante Perrin, were charged based on a coerced false confession from Lewis. All 4 faced the ultimate penalty and sat in jail for 18 months, waiting to find out if the state would seek to end their lives for something they did not do. Meanwhile, Black had truthfully confessed to investigators within weeks of Lewis's false confession. But police dismissed his confession as a ploy, a manipulative attempt to land himself on death row. They ignored the real confession and pursued the false one. It was not until July of 2002 that charges against the first 4 were finally dropped. The city paid them a combined $1.9 million in a settlement. The actual perpetrators were not charged until November of that year. Black and getaway driver Bruce Vini pleaded guilty. The Faruqi brothers stood trial and were convicted after 13 days of testimony and evidence. They accepted a sentencing deal: life in prison in exchange for giving up all appeal rights, in order to avoid the harshest possible outcome. Black and both Faruqis received 7 consecutive life sentences without parole, 1 for each person who did not survive that night. Vini, the getaway driver who waited in the car, received 15 to 30 years and was paroled in March of 2019. He served his time and walked free, while the 3 men who entered the house will never leave prison. The 25th anniversary was marked with a vigil at the Lucian Blackwell Community Center on December 28, 2025. The case became the subject of a groundbreaking UPenn Law School Sentinel Event Review that produced 18 recommendations to prevent wrongful prosecutions. 7 people lost their lives. 4 innocent men nearly lost theirs to a false confession. And all of it traced back to a Chevrolet Corsica with a blown clutch and a man who wanted his Dodge Intrepid back. How does a $300 car dispute end with 7 people face down on a floor? The Lex Street case started with a broken car and ended with 7 lives lost. But the next case is about a group of teenagers who planned something unspeakable for a $500 paycheck. The murder of Jason Sweeney. On May 30th, 2003, 16-year-old Jason Sweeney was lured to a wooded area in the Fishtown neighborhood of Philadelphia. The person who lured him was his 15-year-old girlfriend, Justina Morley, with the promise of a private encounter. What was actually waiting for him were 3 of his male friends, armed with a hatchet, a hammer, and a rock. They were there to take his $500 weekly construction paycheck so they could buy heroin. Jason worked at his father's construction company and dreamed of becoming a Navy SEAL. He was well liked in the neighborhood and trusted the people around him completely. His best friend since 4th grade was Edward Batzig Jr., 16. The other two were brothers Dominic Koya, 17, who was just 14 days shy of his 18th birthday, and Nicholas Koya, 16. The four of them had been planning this for days. They knew exactly when Jason would get paid. They knew the amount. Before the attack, they psyched themselves up by listening to the Beatles' Helter Skelter approximately 42 times on repeat. The song choice was deliberate. They wanted to build themselves into a state where they could go through with it. Then came the countdown. 3, 2, 1. Batzig struck the first blow with a hatchet. Dominic and Nicholas joined in with a hammer and the rock. They wore latex gloves they had brought with them. Jason begged them to stop. He said, "Please stop, I am bleeding." They did not stop. They finished by dragging a large boulder to where he lay and dropping it on his head, crushing it beyond recognition. He could not be identified by his face. The medical examiner identified him by a distinctive cut on his hand. After it was over, the four of them shared a group hug. They split the money evenly. Then they went out and bought heroin, Xanax, and jewelry. They called it partying beyond redemption. Despite all four being regular users of controlled substances, every single one of them was completely sober during the act itself. They had planned it clear-headed. Dominic Koya, when asked about it later, confirmed without hesitation, "No, I was as sober as I am now. It is sick, is it not?" The sobriety made the case even more disturbing for investigators and jurors. This was not an impulsive act fueled by substances. It was calculated, rehearsed, and carried out with full awareness of what they were doing to someone they called a friend. Morley pleaded guilty to third-degree charges and received 17.5 to 35 years. She was released on parole in December of 2020, having served roughly 17 years. The three males were convicted of first-degree charges in March of 2005 and received mandatory life without parole. After the Supreme Court's Miller v. Alabama ruling in 2012 barred mandatory juvenile life without parole sentences, Nicholas Koya and Batzig received resentencing hearings. Jason's mother Dawn appeared at every hearing, fighting to make sure the sentences held. Both had their life without parole sentences upheld. Judge Sandy Bird called it an uncommon case with no factors which removed the defendant from the punishment. Dominic Koya's sentence was already final and not subject to the new ruling because he was close enough to 18 at the time. All three males remain incarcerated with no prospect of release. Dominic Koya is at SCY Green in southwestern Pennsylvania. Nicholas Koya is at SCY Mercer in the northwestern part of the state. Batzig is at SCY Chester near Philadelphia. Jason Sweeney's mother, Dawn, has publicly fought every resentencing attempt over the past 2 decades, appearing in court each time to look the men who took her son in the eye and to remind the judges what they did to a 16-year-old boy for $500. Jason was 16 years old. He was lured to a wooded area by his girlfriend and beaten by his best friends for a paycheck. They listened to Helter Skelter 42 times, counted down from 3, and took turns with a hatchet, a hammer, and a rock. Then they hugged each other, split the cash 4 ways, and went out to buy heroin and jewelry. What kind of bond exists between people who can do that to a friend they have known since the 4th grade and then embrace afterward? Jason's friends counted down and took turns. But the final case on this list has no countdown, no crime scene, and no answers. Just 2 people who walked out of a bar on South Street and vanished without leaving a single trace. Danielle Imbo and Richard Patrone. On the night of February 19th, 2005, 34-year-old Danielle Imbo and 35-year-old Richard Patrone Jr. left Abilene's bar on South Street in Philadelphia. It was a freezing night with snow falling. Witnesses at the bar described them as affectionate and happy. They walked out together toward Richard's black 2001 Dodge Dakota pickup truck sometime around 11:30 to 11:45 in the evening. And then they were gone. The truck was gone. In 21 years, not a single piece of physical evidence has been found. No bodies, no vehicle, no crime scene, no forensic material of any kind. Danielle was a mortgage processor and the mother of a young son who was just 18 months old at the time. She was going through a contentious divorce from Joe Imbo, a process that had created significant tension in her personal life. Richard was a master wedding cake designer who worked at his family's bakery, Viking Pastries, in Ardmore. He was known for his artistry and his dedication to the family business. The two had known each other since high school in South Philadelphia and had recently rekindled a romantic relationship after years apart. Their reunion that evening was completely spontaneous. Danielle had canceled other plans at the last minute to meet Richard at Abilene's. Nobody planned for them to be together that night. Nobody expected them to be at that bar. And yet, someone knew. Neither Danielle nor Richard made a phone call, used a credit card, accessed a bank account, or triggered an EZ pass after that night. The truck did not appear on any toll bridge camera connecting Philadelphia and New Jersey, despite the fact that both of them lived across the Delaware River in New Jersey and would have needed to cross a bridge to get home, wherever that truck went. It did not cross any monitored route out of the city. The FBI has conducted nearly 300 interviews over 2 decades. They searched waterways by ground, air, and dive team. In 2022, the private dive team, Adventures with Purpose, used high-end sonar to scan the Delaware and Schuylkill rivers, looking for any sign of the truck or the 2 people inside it. Nothing was found. Not a hubcap, not a license plate, not a fragment of anything. A grand jury was convened at least 6 years after the disappearance, focusing on people close to Joe Imbo, but the grand jury took no action. Joe Imbo has been scrutinized extensively, but has never been named a suspect. His alibi, attending a party in Toms River, New Jersey, with law enforcement family members, has not been disproven. He took a polygraph test. The FBI has never disclosed the results. 2 people connected to the case are now gone. Robert Carey, rumored to have been involved, hanged himself in his Bucks County jail cell in April of 2010. Rumors of a confession note were debunked by the FBI. Rob LaFleur, a junkyard owner believed to be connected to the truck's disappearance, passed away from an overdose in 2012. FBI agent Vito Roselli lamented, "There are a lot of people no longer alive in this case that I wish I could go talk to." The FBI marked the 20th anniversary in February of 2025 with a formal press conference. Agent Phil Blessington stated definitively, "I do not think there is any chance that they are alive." He expressed conviction that the tight-knit South Philadelphia community is keeping the secret, that people in the neighborhood know what happened and have chosen to stay silent for 2 decades. A major podcast, There and Gone South Street, launched in July of 2024 with unprecedented FBI cooperation, exploring corruption angles and potential connections to organized crime in the area. The series brought renewed national attention to the case and generated new tips, though none have produced a breakthrough. The FBI continues to offer $15,000 for information leading to a resolution. Richard's family has never held a funeral. They have no remains to bury, no closure to hold on to, nothing but the absence itself. Viking Pastries Bakery, the family business where Richard spent his career designing wedding cakes, eventually closed. His father shut the doors after the joy of the business had gone. 21 years, 2 people, 1 truck, and not a single piece of evidence. How does an entire vehicle with 2 people inside disappear from a major American city on a snowy February night without leaving a single trace behind? This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.